Texas, 1884. The train whistle cut across the barren land like a blade, its cry scattering sparrows from the telegraph wires. Steam curled into the pale sky as the wheels screeched to a halt, and from the last carriage stepped a young woman clutching a battered suitcase. Her name was Anya, and though she carried a letter promising a new life, she carried something else the town of Dust Hollow did not forgive: an accent. She had crossed an ocean, left behind family, and spent her last coins to stand here in a place where strangers judged her before she spoke her second word. Bonnet low, hands trembling, she looked toward the gathered townsfolk, searching for the man who had written her. But when she spoke his name, laughter rippled through the crowd like dry grass catching fire. "Foreign," someone muttered. Another spat near her boots. Anya's cheeks burned crimson as hope bled into humiliation. The man she had come to marry turned his back, and in that cruel silence of rejection, she believed she was alone. Until one rancher, standing apart beneath the brim of his hat, saw her, not as foreign, but as human. The crowd at the depot thinned, leaving only drifting scraps of dust and the echo of their laughter. Anya stood frozen, suitcase clutched like a shield, her throat tight with unshed tears. The train that had carried her dreams hissed and groaned, then pulled away, leaving her with nothing but silence. She wanted to vanish, to fold herself into the earth, and escape the weight of their stares. But then she noticed him, one figure who had not joined in the cruelty. A tall rancher leaned against the rail of the stockyard fence, hat brim casting his face in shadow. His coat was worn, boots heavy with trail dust. He hadn't spoken, hadn't laughed, but his eyes followed her with something different, something steady. When the last jeer died out, he straightened, crossed the muddy street, and stopped a few paces away. "You'll catch cold standing there," he said simply. His voice was low, gravel softened by quiet. He lifted a hand, not to touch, but to gesture toward the wagon tied nearby. Anya blinked, uncertain. Kindness in this place felt like a trap. She swallowed, her accent slipping rough through the English words. I have no place." "Then come," he answered. "A roof's better only by the hiss of drizzle on leather and the groan of wagon wheels." Anya kept her shawl tight, stealing glances at him. His silence wasn't the cruel kind she had tasted at the station. It was a silence that left room, that did not press or demand. After a time, he said, "Name's Caleb." She pressed her lips together, then answered, "Anya." The syllables carried her homeland with them, unashamed this time, though soft. He nodded once as if that was enough. By nightfall, they reached a low ranch house crouched against the prairie wind. Smoke rose faint from the chimney, and the scent of cedar drifted in the damp. Caleb carried her suitcase inside, set it by the hearth, and wordlessly hung his hat. Bread, firelight, a roof. It wasn't much, but after a day of laughter and cruelty, it was more than mercy. It was a beginning. The ranch house was not large nor polished, but it carried the bones of a man who worked with his hands and asked for little else. Rough-hewn beams crossed the low ceiling, and the stone hearth crackled with cedar. The air smelled of leather, wood smoke, and something faintly sweet, like hay drying in summer. Anya stood inside the doorway, shawl still drawn tight, while Caleb moved with a kind of practiced quiet. He wasn't clumsy nor hurried, just deliberate. Every sound, boots scuffing wood, the clink of a kettle, seemed steady, sure. He set bread and a tin of beans on the table, then stepped back, letting her approach in her own time. No explanations, no questions, just space. Anya's hands trembled as she set down her suitcase. She felt the weight of silence pressing, not like the cruel silence of the train depot, but something different. This was a silence that waited, that gave room to breathe. She sat, smoothed her skirt, and forced her voice forward. "Thank you." Caleb only nodded, slicing the bread with a hunting knife, sliding half toward her plate. "Eat." They shared that first meal without ceremony, without conversation. The bread was coarse, the beans plain, but it filled the hollow place in her stomach. Each bite anchored her to the truth. She had not been left to freeze on the street. For now, that was enough. When the plates were cleared, Morning came with pale light and the cry of meadowlarks. Anya rose early, smoothing her skirt, eager to prove she was no burden. She found Caleb already outside, hauling buckets of water from the well. His shoulders strained against the faded fabric of his shirt, each motion practiced. She hovered, unsure if she should approach. Finally, she asked, "Can I help?" He looked at her over one shoulder, the sun catching in his unshaven jaw. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a small nod, he handed her one bucket. "Carry what you can." The weight nearly tipped her sideways, but she gritted her teeth, clutching the handle until her arm ached. He didn't laugh, didn't scold, just let her walk at her own pace, matching his stride to hers. When they reached the house, her hand blistered red from the iron handle. He noticed but said nothing, only set the bucket down beside hers, as though effort itself mattered more than strength. Through the days that followed, they worked side by side. She mended shirts by the hearth, needles slipping through worn fabric, while he split logs in the yard, each strike ringing out sharp against the morning air. When she tried to sweep the floor, he only stepped aside, boots silent on wood. When she kneaded dough, he stoked the fire higher, saying nothing. It was a rhythm, awkward at first, then steady, two strangers learning the edges of each other without touching. One afternoon, while dusting a narrow shelf, Anya's hand brushed something unexpected, a small wooden carving, no larger than her palm. A treble clef smoothed by knife, its curves delicate against the grain. She stared at it, heart leaping, for music had been her language once. Back home, before the voyage, before rejection, she had played piano in her village, her accent unashamed when set to melody. Here, in this quiet place, the memory rose raw. When Caleb entered, brushing dirt from his hands, she held it out carefully. "This is yours?" He paused, eyes flicking to the carving, then back to her. His answer was a single nod. "It is music," she whispered, voice trembling at the edges. Another nod. He didn't explain, didn't ask why her eyes brimmed with sudden tears. He only set the carving back on the shelf, gentle, as if it mattered, and in the faintest grin breaking through the weathered lines of his face. Heat rose to her cheeks, but she laughed too, light and surprised, the sound foreign even to her own ears. The ranch felt different after that, less like a shelter against the storm, more like the start of something neither dared name. At night, when rain tapped against the windows, they shared quiet moments by the fire. She told him fragments of her journey, how the ship smelled of salt and sickness, how the letter she carried was her last hope. He listened without interruption, eyes fixed on the flames, as though storing each word. When she faltered, fearing judgment, he only said, "You made it. That's what matters." In return, he gave her pieces of himself, how the land had taken his parents early, how the ranch was both burden and anchor. He didn't dress it with poetry, didn't soften the edges. His words were plain, but they carried truth. And in that truth, trust grew. Two strangers, bound by silence and work, began to carve out a rhythm. Not love, not yet, but the first threads of it, fragile as spider silk in the dawn. The weeks turned into a rhythm of small mercies and quiet work. Days on the ranch followed the sun, water hauled, wood split, meals shared, fences mended. In the evenings, Anya would hum fragments of old songs as she mended shirts by firelight. Caleb listened without comment, but sometimes his hands stilled, as if the music stirred a memory buried too deep to name. But the world beyond their cedar walls had not forgotten her. One Saturday, Caleb hitched the wagon to ride into Dust Hollow. Supplies were running low, flour, salt, lamp oil. Anya hesitated when he gestured for her to join him. The thought of the depot, of laughter biting sharp against her accent, still lived fresh in her chest. Yet she refused to let fear be stronger than her will. She lifted her chin and climbed onto the bench beside him. The town was alive with weekend bustle. Horses tied to posts, men arguing over cattle prices, women haggling for cloth. The air carried smoke from the blacksmith's forge, mingled with the yeasty scent of bread cooling on a merchant's cart. It didn't take long. As soon as Anya stepped down, baskets in hand, prosperous rancher, her words dripping with scorn. "So this is the bride," she sneered, eyes raking over Anya. "Didn't take long for folks to see why you were left standing at the depot. Can't even speak proper. What man would want a wife who can't be understood?" Laughter prickled from a few onlookers. Anya froze, cheeks burning, throat locked. The memory of that first day rushed back, the train steam, the jeers, the turning back of the man she had crossed the ocean for. She clutched the basket tighter, wishing the ground might open and take her. Caleb stepped between them. His voice was low, even. "That's enough." Mrs. Harlow sniffed. "I'm only speaking truth. Foreign tongues bring foreign trouble." For a long moment, Caleb's eyes held hers. No raised voice, no threats, just steady silence that carried its own kind of weight. Finally, Mrs. Harlow shifted, muttering as she turned away. The crowd dispersed, though whispers lingered like smoke. Anya's chest ached, shame tangled with gratitude. She wanted to thank him, but the words stuck. Caleb only tipped his hat, guided her back toward the wagon. "Come on," he said. "We've got what we need." The tension did not end there. That evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, a rider appeared on the ridge. Dust trailed his horse, and his coat was finer than most men in Dust Hollow wore. He dismounted at the ranch gate, boots polished, smile thin as a knife. "Miss Anya," he called, voice slick with mock courtesy. Or should I say, Mrs. Harlow soon enough. Anya stiffened. She knew him, Richard Harlow, son of the woman who had mocked her in town. Before she ever left her homeland, before her letter crossed the ocean, arrangements had been whispered that she might be matched with him. But the moment she spoke with her accent, Richard had turned his back. Now here he was, hands gloved, words dripping with false charm. "You were meant for me," he said. "My folks saw fit to decline, true, but I've given it thought. A woman's tongue matters little in private. A house like ours could make you forget this. Exile." Anya's stomach knotted. Behind her, Caleb stepped forward, broad frame fire. Fingers knotted in her shawl. Caleb repaired tack at the table, hands steady, but his silence carried an edge she hadn't heard before. Finally, she whispered, Maybe he is right. Maybe I do not belong." Caleb set down the leather strap, eyes meeting hers across the firelight. "The longin' ain't something someone else gives you. You take it, you hold it, that's all." Her chest tightened. No one had ever said such words to her, not her parents, who had sent her across the sea, not the man who had rejected her at the depot. The warmth of the fire seemed to settle deeper into her bones. But outside those walls, the conflict brewed. Whispers in town grew louder. Foreign girl, strange accent. Caleb's name dragged through mud for taking in strays. And Richard Harlow, stung by refusal, nursed anger that would not rest. Each day Anya and Caleb drew closer, trust braided by work and silence. Yet each day the world beyond their cedar walls seemed determined to tear them apart. The storm had not yet broken, but its thunder was already rolling across the prairie. The wind howled across the open range, carrying the scent of storm and gunpowder. Anya stood in the doorway of Caleb's ranch house, skirts whipping at her ankles, heart drumming against her ribs. The men who had laughed at her on that first day in Dust Hollow now returned, not with jeers but with rifles slung across their saddles. Dust churned beneath the hooves of their horses as they reined in before the house, eyes sharp with scorn. Their leader, a thick-jawed cattleman named Briggs, spat into the dirt. "You think you can bring her here, Caleb? Shelterin' what ain't wanted?" His gaze slid over Anya like a knife. "Foreign blood don't belong on this land." Caleb stepped forward, steady as stone, the rifle in his hands resting low but ready. "She belongs here same as you or me," he said, voice carrying like thunder. "And she's under my roof. That makes her my fight." The men exchanged glances, murmurs rising. They had not expected his defiance to ring so sharp. Briggs sneered, drawing his revolver. "Then it'll be your grave." The storm broke in gunfire. The night cracked with the roar of bullets slamming into wood and earth. Anya dropped low, crawling to the hearth where Caleb had set spare cartridges. Her hands shook, but not with rafters. Anya coughed, eyes watering as heat pressed close. "Go!" Caleb shouted, voice raw against the blaze. "Take the back, run for the creek." But she did not run. She grabbed a bucket, filled it from the water barrel, and dashed it across the growing fire. Sparks hissed and spat, smoke curling around her face. Again and again she ran, hauling water until her arms screamed with pain. Caleb fought outside, every shot echoing his vow to keep her safe. The fire clawed higher. The men's voices grew nearer. Briggs bellowed, "Drag her out! Show her what happens when you mix with us!" Anya froze, fear slicing deep. Yet in the same heartbeat, something older, fiercer than fear, burned inside her. She had lived too long in silence, hiding behind shame and accents. Now she found her voice. She burst from the doorway, smoke curling around her, hair wild with firelight. "Enough!" she cried, her words thick with her homeland but clear with defiance. "I am not foreign. I am a woman. This land does not belong to you. It belongs to God, to the wind, to all who work and bleed for it." Her cry rang across the storm, stopping the men in their tracks. Even Briggs hesitated, revolver half raised. In that pause, Caleb struck. He lunged from the shadows, tackling Briggs hard into the mud. The gun discharged, muzzle flash searing the night. Silence followed. Caleb staggered, blood blooming red across his side. The bullet had not missed him. He pressed a hand to the wound, swaying but refusing to fall. Anya ran to him, dropping to her knees in the dirt. "No, no, stay with me," she whispered, hands slick with his blood. Her tears cut lines through soot on her cheeks. The riders shifted uneasily. Their leader wounded, their fire quenched, their cruelty met not with weakness but with a woman's voice that refused to break, they faltered. One by one they turned their horses, spurred by something deeper than Caleb's rifle. Shame. Shame of what they had tried to destroy. Briggs groaned, clutching his ribs, but his men abandoned him there, fleeing into the storm. The ranch lay charred, the fire smoldering low. Saved, but to save him. His hand found hers, fingers cold but holding fast. "I'll try," he whispered, "for you." The fight was over, but the battle for his life had just begun. And Anya, a woman once mocked as foreign, once discarded like dust, had chosen her place, not in running, not in silence, but at his side, carrying him through fire and storm. For love, she would not surrender. The rain did not stop until morning. It fell all night, as if the heavens themselves wept for what had been burned and broken. By dawn, the prairie glistened silver, every blade of grass jeweled with water. Smoke curled faint from the ranch house, not from flame now, but from the stubborn fire Anya had rebuilt in the hearth, small, steady, alive. Inside, Caleb lay on the bed, his face pale, his breath shallow but unbroken. Bandages wrapped his side where the bullet had torn him, soaked through once, twice, before the bleeding slowed. His eyes fluttered open when the sun slipped through the window, and the first thing he saw was her. Anya sat close, hair damp from the storm, eyes rimmed with exhaustion but burning with resolve. She had not slept. Her hand rested over his, holding him to the world with nothing but touch. "You stayed," he rasped, voice like gravel after rain. Her lips trembled, but she managed a small smile. "So did you." For a long moment, they said nothing more. The silence between them was not heavy. It was full, rich with what had been fought for and nearly lost. Outside, the land steamed, alive with the scent of wet earth and cedar. Days passed slowly. Caleb drifted in and out of fever, each time finding her there, her voice coaxing him back, her hands steady even when fear gnawed her bones. She fed him broth, washed the wound, spoke prayers half in her own tongue, half in English. When his strength failed, she lent him hers. The ranch bore scars of the fire, blackened timbers, scorched fence posts, but it stood, and so did she. Word spread through Dust Hollow of what had happened. Men who had once laughed at her now avoided her gaze. Some muttered shamefaced apologies when they passed her in the mercantile. Others said nothing at all. For the first time since she stepped off the train, no one spat at her feet. The weeks, he healed. She tended the ranch, feeding stock, patching fences, carrying water with sleeves rolled high. Neighbors, once cold, began stopping by, offering tools, wood, even food. Some out of guilt, some out of admiration. But she accepted little, relying on her own two hands, her own steady will. Caleb watched, strength slowly returning, and each day his admiration grew. One morning, as the cottonwoods stirred in the spring breeze, Caleb stepped outside unaided, leaning only on the doorframe. Anya was hanging linens to dry, the white cloths snapping like sails. He watched her, the way the sun caught her hair, the way she moved with quiet certainty, and he knew. When she turned, he was already walking toward her, slow but steady. He stopped before her, breath a little short but eyes clear. "Anya," he said, voice low, "I can mend fences, I can mend barns, but what I cannot mend is the thought of a life without you." Her hands stilled on the clothespin, eyes wide. He reached for her, thumb brushing her wrist. "Marry me, not because I owe you my life, but because my life is yours already." For a heartbeat she did not breathe. Then tears welled, not from sorrow but from joy, too vast for words. She nodded, voice breaking. "Yes, Caleb, yes." They wed not in the town's church, but in the wildflower meadow beyond the creek, where the earth still carried the memory of rain. Friends stood as witnesses, few but true, men and women who had seen what they had endured. Anya wore no silks, no lace, only a simple dress she had mended herself. In her hair, a crown of prairie blossoms. Caleb wore his hat, his boots, his scars. Their vows were plain, spoken beneath the open sky. No priest needed to gild them. He promised to stand beside her through fire, storm, and silence. She promised to carry him, not as foreign, not as stranger, but as home. And when they kissed, the meadow seemed to hold its breath, the wind itself pausing to honor the moment. Seasons turned. The ranch healed as they did. New beams rose where fire had taken the old, fences straight and strong. Her not as foreign, but as his. It was a love forged not in ease, but in fire, a love that endured. And as the prairie winds carried their laughter across the land, Dust Hollow remembered. Sometimes the strongest roots are the ones carried from farthest away. Years later, the land remembered. The meadow where Caleb and Anya had wed grew wild with flowers each spring, bright yellow against the rolling green, as if the earth itself marked their vows in color. The ranch, once scarred black by fire, now stood solid, its timbers honeyed with age, its fences straight and sure. Children's laughter often rang across the yard, mingling with the soft creak of the windmill and the lowing of cattle. But even more than the ranch, it was the people of Dust Hollow who changed. The same town that had laughed at Anya when she first stepped off the train had, over time, come to lean on her strength. She spoke with the same accent that once drew ridicule, yet now folks listened when she talked of weather, of crops, of storms she could smell in the wind. They brought her bread in winter, shared seeds in spring. Some even asked her to teach their children words from her homeland, so they might carry a piece of the wider world in their pockets. Caleb often watched this with quiet pride. He'd lean on the fence, arms crossed, hat shading his eyes, and see how far they had come. Not just the ranch, not just the town, but the both of them. He thought often of that night, the fire, the gunshots, the moment he nearly slipped from the world. He remembered Anya's hands pressing down, her voice fierce and unyielding. "Stay with me," she had demanded, and because of her, he had. Scars marked his side still, pale ridges across skin, but he never saw them as weakness. To him, they were proof, proof that love could anchor a man to life itself. Anya bore her own scars, though many were unseen. The sting of rejection, the weight of leaving her homeland, the ache of knowing her parents had died oceans away, never to meet the man she loved or the children she bore. Some nights she would stand outside, eyes lifted to the horizon, whispering prayers in her native tongue. Caleb would step beside her, wordless, and lay his hand over hers. Together they would. She faced down Briggs and his riders, her voice cutting through fire and gunpowder. They remembered that courage, and courage commands respect. As for Briggs, he limped away from Dust Hollow not long after that night. Wounded in body and pride, he left his land behind, unable to bear the weight of his own shame. Some said he drifted south, others north, but none cared enough to know. Dust Hollow thrived better without him. In time, the story of that night blurred into legend. Children whispered of the foreign woman who stood against men with guns, who fought fire with her bare hands, who loved a rancher back from the brink of death. Around campfires, the tale grew taller. Some said the storm itself had bent to her will. Others said she tamed Caleb, though those who truly knew him laughed at that. But Anya never sought legend. She sought only to live, to mend clothes, to bake bread, to teach her children songs of two tongues, to share long evenings with the man who had once offered her shelter without asking a single question. And Caleb, he lived for the quiet moments, the warmth of her beside him in the bedroll, the smell of her hair braided with wildflower petals, the way she hummed while hanging laundry. He loved her not because she had saved him, but because with her, life felt whole. Seasons shifted. Winters came cold and long, but their fire never died. Summers came hot and dry, but their well never ran empty. They bore hardship together, and in that bearing, their love only grew. One autumn evening, when the children had gone chasing fireflies, and the sky bled orange across the plains, Caleb carved something into the gatepost of the ranch. Anya found it later, running her fingers over the rough letters. It read, "She gave me a home when I had none. She gave me a life when mine was ending. She gave me everything." She traced the words, tears brimming, then pressed her forehead against the post in quiet gratitude. She didn't need grand declarations. She had always believed love was in the doing. Yet seeing his words carved into wood, permanent as the land itself, she knew his heart as surely as her own. Years would turn to decades. Their hair would silver, their steps slow. But long after, the ranch would stand, tended by their children, then their children's children. And the story of Caleb and Anya, of the rancher with time, but in the land itself. The plains keep stories like the sky keeps stars, silent, endless, waiting for those who pause long enough to listen. And somewhere out there, between the cottonwoods and the rolling meadows, lives the story of Caleb and Anya. Their tale was not carved in marble or sung in great halls. It was written in the dust of wagon wheels, in the smoke of fire that tried to take them, in the laughter of children born of two worlds. It was written in scars and storms and the quiet resilience of two souls who chose to belong to one another when the world said they should not. Years after their vows beneath the wildflowers, folks would still whisper about them. The town that once spat at her name came to tell its daughters, "Be as brave as Anya." They told their sons, "Stand as steadfast as Caleb." Not perfect, not saintly, but human, and yet, somehow, more. For they had fought through hatred and fire, and in surviving, they showed what love could do. And isn't that the marrow of every Western worth telling? Not just guns drawn at dawn or cattle rustled at midnight, but love. The quiet, bone-deep kind. The kind that plants roots in hard soil and grows anyway. When Anya first stepped off the train, she carried nothing but a battered suitcase, a letter, and the heavy weight of being unwanted. When Caleb first saw her, he was a man already worn by silence, carrying scars no one else bothered to see. Together, they were broken pieces. But when broken pieces meet, sometimes they don't cut each other. Sometimes they fit. That fitting cost them dearly. Blood spilled, fire licked at their walls, cruel men tested their resolve. And yet, through sacrifice, they endured. Caleb nearly gave his life. Anya nearly gave hers in standing unbowed. Each chose the other, not once, but again and again, in every moment of fear, every moment of doubt. That choice became their strength. The land bore witness. The meadow where they wed bloomed brighter each spring, as though wildflowers remembered their vows. The ranch that once smoldered in ash grew stronger, rebuilt beam by beam, scarred but unbroken, just like them. Even Dust Hollow, stubborn as dry clay, softened, reshaped by what it had seen. The people could not deny what courage looks like when it wears the letter that once promised her something false. Life was in the choosing, her choosing him, his choosing her, again and again. And isn't that what love really is? Not grand gestures alone, though theirs were carved in fire and blood. Love is the daily choosing, to mend fences side by side, to carry water when one is weary, to hold a hand through fever, to share laughter after years of silence. When the children of Caleb and Anya grew older, they carried those lessons like heirlooms. They spoke two tongues, bore two histories, and carried forward a third. A story all their own, stitched from courage, sacrifice, and tenderness. They told their children and their children's children of the night their mother stood in firelight and declared she would not bow. They told of the day their father carved into a gatepost words not of conquest, but of gratitude. Generations later, even when the ranch changed hands, those words weathered into the wood remained. She gave me a home when I had none. She gave me a life when mine was ending. She gave me everything. The letters faded but never disappeared, and long after Caleb and Anya had been laid to rest beneath the cottonwoods, travelers who passed the ranch would pause at that gatepost, tracing the old carving with their fingers, and ask, who were they? And always, someone in Dust Hollow would answer, because the West does not forget its truest loves. So let this be remembered. A rancher and a woman called Foreign stood against fire and cruelty. And in the end, love won. Not in a grand parade, not in riches, but in a hearth's glow, in children's laughter, in seasons endured together. That is the legacy of Caleb and Anya. And maybe, if you listen close when the wind sweeps across the plains, you'll hear it still. The sound of a train whistle, the hush of wildflowers bowing, the echo of two voices vowing not to surrender. A promise carried forward, not just for them, but for anyone who's ever felt cast aside, unwanted, or alone. Because their story whispers to us all, you are not foreign where love has claimed you. You are not unwanted where love has chosen you. You are home when love is strong enough to build one with you. And that, friends, is why we tell stories of the Wild West. Not for the dust and the danger alone,